King Draven Ashveil had not slept in 3 days. The pain came in waves, rising from somewhere deep inside his chest, a heat that no healer could explain and no remedy could touch. His guards stood far from his door now. They had learned, the hard way, that getting close to him during one of his rage spells was not safe for anyone, not even for the strongest among them. It had started 2 years ago, after his mother, Queen Marae, was killed in her own garden. No one knew who did it. No one had ever been punished for it. Since that night, something inside Draven had broken, and his wolf, once calm and steady, had turned wild and restless. He could rule a kingdom with a clear mind, sign treaties, lead armies, and speak with kings from distant lands without losing his composure. But the moment his control slipped, even for a second, his anger turned into something almost impossible to stop. The court called it a curse. The older wolves whispered that the king had lost a piece of his soul the night his mother died, and that piece had never come back. On the evening, everything changed. The palace was bright with candlelight for the mating ceremony, a tradition where young wolves were formally matched before the entire court. It was meant to be a night of joy. For Wren Calloway, it became the worst night of her life. She stood in the center of the grand hall, wearing a simple pale blue dress, her hands folded in front of her, waiting for her name to be called. She was an Omega, gentle and quiet, the kind of wolf many in the court overlooked. She had hoped, in a small and private way, that the ceremony might finally give her a place where she belonged. When her name was called, the alpha she had been promised to, a proud young noble named Wren Hale, stepped forward, and then, in front of everyone, shook his head. "I reject this match," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "I will not bind myself to an Omega, with no name, no power, and no worth to this pack." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some nobles laughed quietly behind their hands. Wren felt her face burn with shame as she stood alone under the weight of every eye in the room. She did not cry, though her throat tightened with the effort of holding it back. She turned and walked out of the hall as steadily as she could, her heart pounding, her mind screaming for her to disappear. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she needed to be far from those staring eyes. She turned down one corridor, then another, until the sound of music and laughter faded behind her. She found herself in a part of the palace she had never seen before, a wing with tall doors and dim torches, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Then she heard it, a low growl, deep and pained, coming from behind a set of heavy wooden doors. 2 guards stood frozen several feet away, their faces pale. "You cannot go in there," one of them said quickly, stepping toward her. "The king is unwell tonight." But Wren barely heard him. Something pulled her forward, an instinct she could not explain, the same instinct that had once told her when storms were coming or when someone nearby was in pain. She pushed past the guard before he could stop her and opened the door. Inside, the room was in chaos. Furniture was overturned, a table lay broken in pieces near the wall, and in the center of it all stood King Draven, his powerful frame shaking, his eyes glowing with a deep amber light that had nothing calm left in it. His claws had extended, his breathing ragged, his whole body trembling with a force that seemed almost too large to be contained. Wren should have been terrified. Every instinct told her to run, but instead, she walked toward him, slowly, the way she might approach a wounded animal. "Stop," the guard hissed from the doorway, but it was too late. Wren reached out and placed her hand gently on Draven's chest, right over his heart. The room went silent. Draven's growl died in his throat. His shoulders, which had been shaking with barely controlled fury, suddenly went still. The amber light in his eyes dimmed, fading into a calmer gold. He looked down at the small hand resting against him, and for the first time in 2 years, the storm inside him quieted. He stared at her as though she were something impossible. "How?" he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. "Did you do that?" Wren, just as surprised as he was, slowly lowered her hand. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "I just felt like I needed to." By the next morning, word had spread through the palace like wildfire. The king, who had remained locked behind closed doors during his fits of rage for 2 years, had been calmed by an Omega no one had thought twice about. The same Omega who had been publicly rejected the night before. Draven summoned her to his private study. She arrived nervous, twisting her fingers together, unsure what to expect. He sat behind a large desk covered with maps and letters, his expression unreadable. "Sit," he said simply. She did. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Your family, your bloodline." Wren blinked, surprised by the question. "There isn't much to tell. My parents kept mostly to themselves. We lived on the edge of the territory, away from court life. My mother always said it was safer that way." Something flickered behind Draven's eyes at that. "Safer how?" "I don't know," she admitted. She never explained. She just always seemed careful, like she was protecting us from something. Draven studied her for a long moment, his sharp gaze taking in every detail, as if trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. "I want you to stay in the palace," he said finally. "Close to me. I need to understand what happened last night, and I believe you may be the only person who can help me control this." Wren hesitated. Being close to the king meant being close to danger, especially with rumors already swirling about her sudden importance. But something about the way he looked at her, raw and almost pleading beneath his usual hardened expression, made her agree. In the days that followed, Wren found herself drawn more deeply into palace life than she ever expected. She was given new chambers near the king's wing, modest but comfortable. Servants treated her differently now, some with curiosity, others with quiet resentment. The nobles who had once ignored her now watched her closely, especially Corin Hale, who seemed unable to look at her without a flash of anger crossing his face. "You think this makes you important?" He snapped at her one afternoon in the garden, blocking her path. "You're still nothing. The king is only using you because of whatever strange trick calmed him that night." Wren held her ground, though her heart pounded. "Maybe," she said evenly, "or maybe you simply never deserved to know what I was worth." She walked past him without waiting for a response, surprised by her own boldness. As the weeks passed, Draven's episodes grew less frequent whenever Wren was nearby. He found himself seeking her out, not just during moments of crisis, but in quiet hours between meetings, walking with her through the palace gardens, asking about her days, her thoughts, the small things that made up her life. Slowly, carefully, something warm began to grow between them, something neither of them had expected. But not everyone was pleased. One of the king's senior advisors, a calculating wolf named Lord Hadrian, began meeting in secret with a small group of nobles who feared losing their influence now that an unknown Omega had gained the king's trust. They had been the ones who orchestrated the old queen's death years before, hoping to weaken the royal bloodline and seize power for themselves. With Draven's rage now being calmed, their carefully laid plans were falling apart. "She must be removed," Hadrian said one night, in a hidden chamber lit by a single candle. "Before she becomes anything more than a passing comfort to him." They began planning quietly, searching for a way to eliminate Wren without drawing suspicion to themselves. One evening, as Wren walked alone through a quieter section of the palace gardens, she felt a chill creep down her spine. Shadows moved between the trees, too deliberate to be the wind. Before she could call for help, two cloaked figures emerged, blocking her path. She turned to run, but a third figure appeared behind her. Her heart pounded as she realized she had walked into a trap. Just as panic began to take hold, a powerful presence surged through the garden. Draven appeared from the shadows, his eyes blazing gold, his expression dark with fury, not the uncontrolled fury of his rage spells, but something sharp, focused, and deadly calm. He moved with precision, placing himself between Wren and the intruders. "Touch her," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "and you will regret it." The intruders hesitated only a moment before fleeing into the darkness, unwilling to face the king directly. Draven did not chase them. Instead, he turned immediately to Wren, checking that she was unharmed, his hands trembling slightly with the effort of containing his anger. "I'm fine," she said softly, placing her hand over his to steady him. "I'm right here." The warmth of her touch settled him instantly, the same way it always did. That night, Draven ordered a full investigation into the attack. Guards questioned witnesses, searched the gardens for clues, and eventually uncovered a trail leading back to Lord Hadrian's private chambers. Letters were found detailing the plot against Wren, along with older documents connecting Hadrian to the conspiracy that had taken the old queen's life. The truth, once hidden, unraveled quickly. Hadrian and his allies had feared a true mate bond, the rare and powerful connection spoken of only in old legends, one capable of restoring balance and strength to the royal bloodline. They had killed Queen Merail to weaken that lineage, never expecting that years later, a quiet, overlooked Omega would carry the very bond they had tried to destroy. When the conspirators were brought before the court, the kingdom watched as the king, with calm and steady authority, stripped them of their titles and banished them from Blackthorn Vale forever. There was no violence in his judgment, only firm and unwavering justice, a sign of the control he had finally found. Afterward, standing in the quiet of the palace gardens where the trap had once been set, Draven took Wren's hand in his. "You changed everything," he said. "Not because of some bond or legend, but because you were the first person who looked at me and wasn't afraid." Wren smiled, her heart full in a way it had never been before. "You looked at me," she said, "like I mattered. No one had ever done that." "You matter more than you know," Draven said quietly, "and I don't intend to let you go." In the weeks that followed, the king formally announced his intention to claim Wren, not out of duty, not out of legend, but out of genuine choice. The court that had once mocked her now watched in stunned silence as the once feared Alpha King stood beside the quiet Omega he had chosen above every noble bloodline offered to him. Corin Hale, who had rejected her so carelessly months before, said nothing as the announcement was made. There was nothing left for him to say. As the kingdom settled into a new era of peace, the people of Blackthorn Vale came to understand a truth that none of them had expected. The strength to calm the fiercest storm did not always come from power or position. Sometimes, it came quietly, gently, from someone the world had once overlooked. And for King Draven Ashveil, that quiet strength was exactly what he had needed all along.